You're listening to the Whole Health Podcast with Alex Cottingham and Trevor Deal. We know that health is hard and confusing, primarily because we lived it. It's part of our story, and we struggled for years until we discovered a better way. On this podcast, we cut through the noise of culture, talk about health the way God designed it, and how you can pursue it. If you're a Jesus follower who cares about your health, then you're in the right place. Get ready for the tangible and actionable steps to build a body, mind, and soul that you're proud of, or as we like to say, so that you can become truly healthy. Let's dive into the show.
Welcome back to the Whole Health Podcast. I have a special guest that I get the pleasure of sitting down and talking with today. We got Chris Cirullo. Did I say your last name right, Chris?
Yeah, you did.
Okay, I want to make sure I said that right. Chris, for the people who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what do you do, why do you do it? Just kind of give us an overall snapshot on who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Chris. I am married to my lovely wife, Justine, for almost 13 years now. We've got 5 boys, ages 8, 6, 4, 2, and 6 months. So our household is absolutely wild. I am a former Army Ranger who turned into fitness and health professional, did a 10-year stint in software and realized that God was asking me to jump back in and serve fathers in a really unique way. And so I get to work with busy business leaders who are fathers and Christians and figure out how I can help them navigate a variety of aspects of health. We live over in Eugene, Oregon. If you guys don't know, that's home of the Oregon Ducks. Come on, let's go. And just took on the Ohio State a couple weekends ago. So life is filled with a lot of health and ministry work for fathers specifically. That kind of is where God has asked me to spend my time. So that's a bit about myself.
Okay, Chris, I got to ask before we kind of get into the conversation here. How in the world do you have 5 boys, 8, 6, 4, 2, and 6 months, and you have found a quiet space in your house to record a podcast? Like, I just imagine like so many boys running behind you, just screaming right now. Like, how did you find the time and space? Like, where are you right now?
I'm in my home office, yeah. But, okay, so there's a couple of tricks of the trade. Number one is for anybody that's listening that does anything online, there's an app called crisp.ai, and it literally filters all background noise. So my kids could be at the door screaming right now and no one would hear it. It's amazing. But then tip number 2 is they are all outside with $5 lightsabers from Walmart attacking each other in the yard. And that keeps them out of the house.
Man, that is so good. I love that. Chris, go ahead and just share us a little bit more about your story. I think stories are fascinating and they just kind of paint a picture a little bit clearer on you. And also don't forget to include like your faith element, your health element, and really what God has done in your life to take you to where you are now and really the work you're doing. So give us the couple minute version of your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up here in Eugene. I ended up playing football at the University of Oregon and left school early to join the military, become an Army Ranger. And it was really interesting going from that season to a season of preparation for 4 combat deployments. I mean, my job essentially was being a machine, being a physical machine, right? A specimen, working out at least twice a day, depending on kind of the nature of our training cycles and our exercise routines in the regiment. And when I got out and got into the fitness industry, anybody who's been around personal trainers in a gym or whatever, they know that they tend to have a morning set of clients and an evening set of clients. And the middle of the day is often a lot slower. And so for many years, I had 4 hours in the middle of the day to do all my workouts and to make sure I was eating clean lunches and like all these things. Come to realize I ended up in the software space, and all of a sudden I'm the client. I'm sitting behind a desk for 8 hours a day. I'm working on a screen. I'm making phone calls. And I suddenly had this brutal realization that my environment had been perfectly crafted to keep me incredibly healthy, incredibly fit, to kind of peak levels of fitness. And that was not the reality anymore. And my core operating system, the things that were actually underneath inside of me, the core nature of who I was actually way less disciplined, way less self-controlled, far more fickle. And so as I was working for myself to develop an entirely new way of life, I began to really discover how important habits were, but even beyond where habits are, the underlying subconscious kind of operating systems that we have that even dictates the habits and the actions that we have. And so that really was a big part of my story, was realizing what it is actually like for everyday people, and then what the actual solution is for that. And I think a lot of health professionals are not given the opportunity to experience that quite the way that I did with a 10-year career in SaaS. And so it was incredibly helpful for me to design or I guess redesign the way that I thought about health and fitness for kind of everyday fathers. And all the while, I had been radically saved, and my faith was becoming a incredibly important aspect of this entire equation. And I realized as I'm reading the scriptures and began to understand how core and central some of those themes and principles are in the spiritual side of things, and how they directly impact and connect to what we're trying to do on the physical side with health and fitness. And so it just took me down this rabbit trail of this kind of merging of spiritual and physical and relational and mental and emotional health kind of all wrapped into one.
I think you said that very concisely, and I have so many questions that we could talk for hours. Just in short, I can relate myself because I grew up an athlete. I grew up prioritizing the physical health side of things, but then also going to church. I ended up getting my master's at seminary and getting the spiritual side of things, and then had a really cool moment where Jesus kind of merged those two together, saying like, hey, your physical disciplines and your spiritual disciplines are a lot more related than they're unrelated, and they impact the same thing. So needless to say, I can 100% relate. Chris, I kind of want to hunker down on something you said, where you said, hey, when I was going through this process and journey, I think your phrase was, I had to rethink and relearn some things. Like I had to stop, pause, and really think about health in a new way and what was going on, because previously it kind of came easier because your environment was priming you for healthy behaviors. But then when you went on this stint of like figuring this new way out, what are some things that you learned, and what are some things that you had to relearn in that stint?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll try to be as concise as I can with this answer, but this one's a bit deeper than the average question. So one of the things that people will notice if they dig into the scriptures deep enough is that both faith and belief in the New Testament, those words all throughout the New Testament, are the same Greek word. So
Yeah, they're interchangeable.
Yep. Every instance of belief. So believing in Jesus or having faith in whatever it is, they're all pistis. It's this Greek word that is basically describing a kind of knowledge that has become so deeply ingrained and so convicting to us that it is demonstrated by action. And so you see in James, he says, faith, pistis, without works is dead. He's saying that pistis without action as the evidence that it is authentic pistis is just knowledge. It's dead. It's not actually this deep conviction that drives human life and behavior. And Paul tells us in Romans 12 to not be conformed to the ways of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind. And there is this aspect that the word mind there is nous in the Greek, and it's described in the lexicon as the organ in which receives the thoughts of God, which is such an
Wow.
interesting way to
Wow.
look at this.
Yeah.
And so I began to realize that transformation in the physical sense and the spiritual sense in all ways is actually coming to the knowledge and then the belief of the truth in every area of life as it pertains to God's ways and principles, what he thinks about me, what's true about him, what's true about me, what are the ways that he operates, what's the way he designed the world. There is a way of truth, and the alternative to the truth is lies. And if pistis is truth that is embodied in action, then to become like Jesus is to actually begin to believe, not know the truth, but believe the truth in every area of life as it pertains to God's ways and principles. The more you believe the truth in every area, the more you look like Jesus. So then the reality of that set in, and I realized from a logical standpoint, okay, if I'm behaving in a particular way, any way that I have a certain behavior, that is rooted in a belief, because belief is tied to action. So I have this belief that I have, and that can either be in things that are true in God's ways and principles, or they can be lies. And those things can dictate ultimately what I do and how my life goes.
Right.
So on the fitness side, if somebody has behaviors that they don't like, or they're recognizing that are disruptive, or that are not helpful, or even flat out evil, then the question then becomes, what is it that I'm believing right now most deeply?
Right.
And a good example that I give to guys is, raise your hand if you know that God is your provider based on reading the scriptures. And everyone's like, well, yeah, I mean, of course.
Right.
And then I asked them, well, have you ever worried about finances or had anxiety? Well, yeah. Have you ever done anything extreme to try to make ends meet, or to do it in your own strength? Okay, well, what's happening there is this disconnection. It's a distinction between what is knowledge, I know God's my provider, and action, what I'm doing as a result of what I most deeply believe right now. And so the process of transformation, both in a spiritual sense and even in a physical sense, and rewiring your habits and getting healthy and becoming somebody who is fit and has a lifelong habit of health and fitness, those are all rooted in the same thing. It's evaluating, what is it that I'm believing that's driving my actions? So when I go snack and I pull something out of the pantry, what's happening right now? What is it that I'm believing that is leading to this particular action? And maybe I'm believing that, it's fine. It's just one snack. It's only one thing. It's not going to amount to much, but ultimately that's a lie, because we know that every small compromise builds on itself and leads to a particular type of core identity that changes the way that we act long term. And most of us have 30 or 20 years of those kinds of things that need to be dealt with. So that's probably the number one most important thing that I've learned through this journey, is how to help people begin to think through that lens and for themselves identify what is it that's driving this, so that I can actually go to the root of it and disrupt that root and let the Lord remind me of what's true and repent against the lie that I've been believing and be transformed.
With the men that you've coached over the years, are there some reoccurring lies or false beliefs that keep coming back up that you're like, hey, if I could tell every man this truth over these 1 or 2 or 3 lies, it would be this? Or have you not really noticed a common theme or thread?
Well, there's definitely a wide range of things, but there are a few things that become consistent. I think one of the big things that people wrestle with is an all or nothing mentality. And I think that is most often rooted in this idea that if I can't do it perfectly, then it's not worth doing at all.
Not worth doing, right?
Or it goes back to those minor, those minor things that we allow in that we think are not a big deal, and so the all or nothing mentality, I think, plagues a lot of men. We are conditioned, I think, by our culture to want things fast. to want things to be relatively automatic. I mean, now we can order an Uber, we can, 2-hour delivery with Amazon. I mean, we can literally, in most cases, have almost anything we want instantaneously. And I think that's really dangerous for our soul. And what that does is it trains us that if we have to spend time, put effort, or it can't be perfect, then why bother?
Right.
And so that's a big one. I think the other one that is probably more insidious and hidden is self-worth.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think people totally misunderstand how valuable they are and how much the Lord values them and values their body. So,
Hey, can I interject right here? Because
yeah,
I coach, I've coached both men and women, and it seems like from the outside, more the self-worth comes from women of like, hey, I want to earn or prove or change the way I look to feel better. Where this is just a very big generalization that from a men's perspective, it would be like, oh, I don't deal with self-worth issues. I don't deal with image issues. Like I know who I am, like just that more prideful stance of guys. But you're saying that's not true, that guys deal with just as much as that as women do. Is that correct?
that is correct. And I would say that it just is hidden. So these guys they're not connecting the dots on what it is. I'll give you an example. So I believe when you look at the scriptures, God, in his infinite creativity, when he could have done anything in the world that he wanted to, he created the human form. Pre-fall, he had infinite knowledge and wisdom and creativity, and he chose to make these humans and then put them in the garden and to walk with them in the cool of the day and to give them work to do and to have them be his vehicle into all the world. Genesis 1:28. You need to be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, and rule, to go bring order out of chaos in all of these spaces. And God, for whatever reason, chose a human and a family to go do that as his ambassadors. It's crazy. So the fall of man happens and sin enters the equation. And you fast forward to the end of the story as we're given this prophetic vision of what life in the end will look like. We are in resurrected bodies on a new earth with new heavens, and we are in the physical form in the presence of God for all eternity.
Right.
And so there's something that God values about the human form that I don't think we fully understand. So in light of that, this is what I mean by the self-worth piece is people do not understand how valuable their human body is, especially to God.
Amen.
And I think that's why it's so hidden, the self-worth piece, because it's not that people are struggling to identify that God values them and that they don't need to earn things. It's that they have lost worth and value in their human form. And so that allows those little compromises. Hey, it's okay if I have some extra drinks. I don't really need to worry about it. It's okay if I have the extra slice of cake. It's fine if I don't get great sleep. I'll be a little tired, but I'll drink some extra cups of coffee. It's okay. Rather than saying, no, actually, this is not just the temple of God, which it absolutely is, but taking it all the way through the entire narrative arc of Scripture. It's like God has this incredible value stamped on the human body, and I need to internalize that and understand the worth, not just of me as a soul, but me as a body. And I think that's where people miss the boat. That's where people, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry about that, Chris. Okay, so let's take this one step further. And how do we wed the two? We just talked about how health is not all or nothing. It's not 100% or zero. But then also, our bodies are so dignified and worthy to be treated and stewarded well. How do we do that without having an all or nothing mindset? Because one boat, if people are thinking, okay, my body is so valuable in God's infinite creativity, wisdom, and power, he created the human form, so I'm going to value it, but to not extreme measures. So where is balance?
I think the balance is found in the body being a vehicle and a conduit for God. It is not for our own. It's not for our own awards or our own accolades or our own,
glory in a
shell,
sense.
glory or shell of an identity that we are shaping for ourselves. It is this reality that we are the only being, spiritual or physical, that has ever been created by God that has this dual purpose of now the capacity to carry the presence of God in us and with us and manifest kingdom realities to the world. There's no other creature that has that.
Sure.
And so as we explore this question, we have to have that as our foundation. It's the purpose of the body is not to look good, feel good, and have a six pack and be fit, and for our own glory be able to say, I accomplished X, Y, and Z, or I can do these particular, CrossFit WODs, or I can do this Spartan race. It's not for that. It's for the purpose of stewarding this thing that is the only being in all of creation that is like it, that God chose to be his vessel and his conduit. And so, Paul says that all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. He's essentially giving us this picture into liberty. And yes, there's liberty, but if you become a slave to things through your liberty, then you're actually becoming ineffective. He has so many different teachings that tie together. He says, do not be drunk on wine, but be filled by the Spirit. He's creating this contrast between these physical habits or these behaviors that we have and things that lead to compulsion and lead to our kind of distorted inner disposition coming out without any inhibitions, and the contrast of that being led fully by the Spirit, filled by the Spirit, compelled by the Spirit, led by the Spirit. And so I think that's the key. I think the key is understanding what the body is for, and then it puts it in its rightful position. It doesn't actually reduce the value at all. It actually increases the value, but it increases the value from the right perspective, which is God's perspective. And then I think that saves us, especially if we are careful to revisit those concepts often and remind ourselves, it saves us from going to the extreme of for ourselves, for our glory, for our own, benefit.
Yeah, I have found the same thing to be true, Chris. I say and I write that people usually fall under two camps of viewing the body, and this is very worldly. They either glamorize or demonize the body. To glamorize the body means you view it too highly, and it becomes an idol. To demonize the body means you view it too low, and it becomes an insecurity. Where I say that truly healthy people do neither. That they, like you said, it is stewardship. It is a vessel and a conduit to bring God's power and glory and activity down here on earth, which is the purpose. So the follow-up question, Chris, is what does this practically look like? Let's say our beliefs are in check and it gets from our head to our heart and like, okay, I fully am with it. What does this practically look like, mind, body, and soul?
Yeah. So are you asking on a personal day-to-day level, like what does it look like for someone to live this out fully?
Spot on.
Okay. So I want to make sure I'm answering the right question. So, yeah, I think there's number one, there's a prioritization. So in order to be led by the Spirit rather than compelled by our own habits, we have to commune with the Spirit.
Amen.
So prioritization number one is, okay, we've got to get aligned with God's thoughts. And that's that nous, that the mind in Romans 12, 1-2. So the only way that you repent, which is to turn from the false and to reclaim the truth, which is what repentance is turning away from sin, turning towards the truth, is to be reminded of and to rehearse the truth. So getting in the Word in a very Spirit-led way, like asking the Lord, hey, reveal to me truth. Remind me of things. John 16, Jesus tells his disciples that when the Spirit comes, he will lead you into all truth. He will remind you of everything Jesus has commanded, and he will tell you of things that are to come. And Jesus tells these disciples, there's so much that I want to tell you, but I can't yet. And that will be revealed when the Spirit of truth comes. And so we have to have this daily practice of being with the Lord. And that doesn't have to look like anything specific as a prescription for everybody. But do you have space where that becomes the centering point of everything else that is to come throughout the day? But then our response to that should be this gratitude to the Lord for what he's done to save us. And ultimately the desire to be the vessel that he wants to work through and be a conduit through. And so for me, this practice looks like a morning routine, actually, that's only about 15 or 20 minutes long. And I'm getting in the Word, I'm responding to the Word with questions or ideas or stuff that gets stirred up into that. It leads me into a moment of just quick kind of prayer and alignment and realizing the presence of God and the value that he's assigned to my body. And then I'm doing some push-ups, I'm hydrating myself, I'm doing a few little key things just to kind of start the day off on a tone of being really well balanced with every aspect of health. It's like, okay, I've captured what God says and what's true, and I'm responding with these other little things. And then it begins to just kind of set the tone for the entire day.
Chris, it's so funny how we've only known each other very briefly. We're in the same area with health and faith, and everything you have said is what Trevor and I have been telling our people from day one. We call them the 7 habits of health, the biggest needle movers of your health and faith, like the biggest buckets. Like, I'm going to spend the most amount of time on the things that move the needle the most. And habit number 1 is abide daily. Like, practicing the presence of God all throughout the day and spending intentional time with Jesus. That is number 1. And then the other 6 are sleeping well, eating clean, moving often, increasing clarity, which is just increasing self-awareness to replace lies with truth, what we just talked about, decreasing stress that we can control, and then cultivating community, doing this with one another, because God designed us for community. So I was just like, man, everything you're saying is aligned, because it's true health. That's why we call it becoming truly healthy, that there is a version that God designed for us to live and thrive. I'm not sure if you want to comment on that or no.
Well, just that you're exactly right. We're in the same boat. Like this is the design of what I do with those busy Christian fathers who are business leaders, is like kind of shaping these kinds of environments. And so the community piece that you said, the abiding, that like all of that is kind of hardwired into the way that I think, the things that I share with them in terms of what they're supposed to be doing with their time, and even how I design the coaching experience and the community that they're a part of, because so many of those pieces that you just mentioned are missing in people's everyday life. And if they can't find it, or they can't discover or cultivate it somewhere that's physical and local, they've got to figure out ways to make sure that those 7 things are happening. Otherwise, they're not going to be living the life that they should be. They're not going to be living fully devoted to the Lord, fully healthy. They're not going to live an impactful life. So yeah, totally agree.
Chris, this is a perfect segue into your business. Give us, like, as someone's listening, they're like, man, Chris is spot on. He helps guys. I'm a busy Christian father that wants to get this right. How do you help people? What do you do? Give us the quick 2 to 3 minute pitch of your business.
Yeah, so there's 3 main pinch points in my opinion. And right now that is confusion, loneliness, and inconsistency. And so my business is designed to help busy Christian fathers with those 3. So confusion, number 1, is there's a million different competing ideologies out in the fitness and health space. There's people on the keto side that are saying it's the only way. If you don't do this, it's like nothing matters. There's people that are vegan. There's carnivore. There's a million different ways to shake things out. And what it does is it creates confusion, because if everybody is saying that their way is the only way, or the best way, or the most like impactful way, then people are left with, well, he's saying this, he's saying that. Like, what do I do? And they freeze with paralysis by analysis. And so I want to create an environment where it actually distinguishes the confusion by bringing clarity. So out of all the information about health and nutrition and fitness, what is the 20% that leads to the 80% of the outcomes that I can teach in very small segments, bite-sized things that every single person should know, internalize, respond to, and apply. Then on the loneliness piece, there's incredible amounts of research that men are just severely lonely. And even if they don't recognize it, or they wouldn't even have put words to that yet, they are lonely. Here's a good azimuth, as we say in the military when we're looking at a compass. The check is, if I was in distress right now, or I had a major fight with my wife, or I had some serious circumstance, is there somebody that I could call that would come over at 1:00 in the morning after answering my phone call? Or do I have a friend that would book a plane ticket to fly and help me if I was in distress? And 90% of men, the answer is no, I do not. And so if you don't have people locally that are doing that, and the reality is that you are the average of the 5 closest people around you, and you have this new vision for health and this new vision for an integrated life of spiritual and physical health, but nobody around you is like that, then how do you find people to link arms with and move in that direction? So we provide a mastermind community of men who are business leaders with children that are married, that are believers, that are moving in this direction. And then the last arm of it is dealing with the inconsistencies. And one of the things, the last thing that plagues men is inconsistency. Being, I work out for 6 months and then I fall off for 3 months. Or I get 6 weeks in, or I do this fitness challenge or this program or whatever. And when I come out the other side, I kind of just revert back to square one. And the reality is if that's happening, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is our belief system. And we have to deal with that. We can't just try to change behavior without changing the underlying system. The way that I often talk about this is, if you think about an app on a phone or an app on your, MacBook or whatever, the app has to be functional with the operating system, and the operating system has to have the right hardware in order to even operate. And so if the app is our behavior, then these are these habits, then we have to not only address kind of like the environment and all of the things that allow that behavior to operate, but also then the underlying hardware that is making it possible for that environment to then elicit the response into those habits that we want. And so we have to go deep. We have to go into kind of the crevices of our soul and figure out, what is it that is disrupting my ability to actually create lasting change and long-term consistency? Because every single thing that I've tried, whether it's signing up for a marathon, going through the fitness challenge, working out with a buddy from work, doing this thing, whatever it is, most people, it does not last. And 95% of people who go through a weight loss routine gain all their weight back plus some in the first year. 95%. And so all that is proving is that there's an underlying system that is dictating all of your stuff. And when the external motivators are out of the equation, whether the race has ended or the challenge is over or you've hit your weight loss goal and now you're going to kind of settle back in, when the external motivators are gone, you default back to the original settings. So we've got to change the original settings in order to change the consistency so that men can have healthy activity for decades, not just weeks or months. So those are the 3 big things: is community, dealing with the knowledge system and like getting the right stuff and filtering out the noise, and then dealing with the underlying stuff that's holding us back long term.
Chris, so as we're rounding third base in our conversation and kind of trending home, I would love to know, what are the things that you do to live a truly healthy life? What are some of the habits, both, I know we kind of talked about them as far as like your morning routine, but even after your morning routine, more like very practical. I would love to hear just some things that you try to incorporate throughout your day.
Yeah. So I don't have too big of an aim from an exercise standpoint. I think one of the biggest fallouts that people have is they want to take on too much, and that's why it doesn't last. And so I definitely take a micro approach to things. So my workouts are 20 or 30 minutes a day. That's it, and I do it 5 days a week. And I make sure that can be consistent over decades rather than having, like we just talked about, these sprints of, lots and burnout and all that. I take daily prayer walks, and I also take meeting walks. And so because I'm behind the computer a lot, if there's ever a time where I don't have to be on camera, that meeting is on the phone and I'm walking the neighborhood by my house. I will start each day. So I have that whole morning routine, and then the family wakes up and I cook them breakfast and all of these things. But before I sit down at the computer, I'm walking the neighborhood for only about 10 minutes and I'm praying about my particular day. Like, Lord, would you lead? Would you give me ideas? Would you help me to show up well for people? Would you help me to get out of the way so you can be in control as I'm making decisions and all of that stuff? I'm aligning to his priorities and his realities rather than my own before I even start working. So I'm trying to remove the best I can self-sufficiency. And then the two other pieces is I keep nutrition really simple. I think if you can learn to enjoy sometimes for celebration's sake, but also to make food largely utilitarian, meaning it's for utility purposes. It's like, this is to fuel me, to keep me healthy, to help me to feel my best, to have mental clarity. Then you can create some systems and some routines around nutrition that make it way more sustainable. And then the last piece is sleep. Like, I've got 5 kids. You can imagine how evenings have gone for the last 8 years of my life, but I will do everything in my power, the right kinds of nighttime routines to shut down, the right kind of, supplementation to ensure that when I'm sleeping, I'm getting as quality of sleep as possible. So I live what I teach, guys. It's don't overthink it. Become incredibly consistent with the basics, and 90% of your health will be taken care of if you do that. I think everybody's looking for the next routine, the next diet, the next challenge, the next thing that's going to help me kind of like, and it's like, no, you need to get the noise out of the way, and you need to do consistent basics for a lifetime, not for 6 weeks. And you will be blown away at what that does for your health.
Listeners, if you're listening to this just audio version, I'm smiling from ear to ear because everything that Chris is saying encourages me, because it's the exact same thing I tell people that I work with as well. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe if we just keep it simple and focus on the main things, your health will improve. And Chris is just validating that. Chris, before we end, I want to kind of do some like fun lightning round practical questions about you, and then also just some random ones as well. So, Chris, what time does the alarm clock go off every morning?
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. What time? What did you eat for breakfast this morning?
I have not eaten breakfast this morning.
When is your next meal?
Lunch.
What are you gonna have?
Burger patties.
Burger patties. Just straight meat.
Yeah, usually for lunch I keep it super simple and I try to hit my protein targets, and then I eat whatever my wife makes for dinner, which is usually meat, veggies, maybe a starch, just kind of depends on what the day looks like.
Love it. Love it. Simple. What was the last book you read?
Ooh, the last book I read. I'm in the middle of rereading Mere Christianity.
Ooh,
I think that
classic.
everybody should read that one. And the one that I finished before that, oh geez, that was probably Revisiting Practicing the Way.
Yeah.
That's a gold one for everybody, and I think a lot of this stuff actually weaves in nicely with what John Mark Comer talks about.
Oh, spot on. What is a common album or playlist that you just like, hey, I just want to jam out to some good tunes? What are you playing?
Believe it or not, right now I am listening to William Augusto as we are talking, soaking in his presence.
No, you're not. Dude, this is hilarious. I have been listening to that for probably about 5 years.
Yep.
Whenever I write, read, think, or pray,
Yes.
that's in the background. That's hilarious, dude. Okay, anyways.
Good.
Okay, a few more. In your opinion, what is the best 3-part movie series? It's got to be at
The
least
best
3 movies or
three
more.
parts.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to go Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings. Dang. I was hoping you were going to say Harry Potter. Last question. If you had to start a YouTube channel that had nothing to do with health, faith, or anything in that realm, and just a random YouTube channel, what is your channel about? What's it called?
Oh, believe it or not, this is actually a current thinking of mine.
Come
So,
on. Come on.
it would probably be self-defense and preparedness for Christian fathers, right? So, can I unpack this for like
Sure.
1 moment?
Yeah.
So, okay, one of the things I think that's missing is a level of fierceness around who Jesus was and an understanding of that fierceness. And this dawned on me more recently as I'm reading Narnia to my kids, and I'm seeing Aslan, right? And the kids were just so afraid of Aslan. They did not even want to approach him when they first met him. And they had just learned from Mr. and Mrs. Beaver that they're like, oh, wait, so he's not safe? And Mr. Beaver goes, safe? Who said anything about safe? Of course he's not safe, but he's good.
That's right.
He's the king, I tell you. And I think one of the things that we forget is the reality of the Gospels being that Jesus did not enact any wrath or fierceness or violence or danger at all, because it was not the time. He was living under total self-control and being led by the Spirit in that season. But the scriptures show us very clearly Jesus is the one bringing judgment. He's the one bringing wrath. He will come and destroy all his enemies. So with that in light, we have this realization of the capacity that Jesus has. The capacity is what's most important. So when I look at, men, it's like, hey, if you're at the grocery store and there's a woman next to you with her child and someone comes and assaults her and steals her kid and runs off, which is a more gospel-centered approach to that situation if you're a bystander? To pursue and risk your life to interject on behalf of someone weaker that cannot defend themselves against the evil that
Amen.
is overtaken by that evil, or to
Yes.
stand and watch it happen? And
Hey, the first one.
yeah. But when we think about this, most men, we live in a day and age where these kinds of skills and realities are not as kind of normal, because we are in such a developed world. And it's not like it once was or like it is in other countries. And so we have to intentionally cultivate strength, fitness, an awareness of just basic skills for how to protect ourselves or our family, or to interject even in a non-violent way when evil is trying to do something. And so if I could create a YouTube channel to just teach people basic skills around survival or self-defense, or even combatives, or anything along those lines, like that, I think that would be an incredibly great use of time.
Probably a terrible idea, but if you had Aslan as like your icon picture, I think that would be hilarious. I think you're spot on. I appreciate your wisdom, your time, your experience, your heart, what you're doing, your work. How can people find you? How can people engage in you, follow you, listen? Tell us where they can learn more about you.
I'm not super active on social, but if you want to find me there, anywhere, it's at Mission Fit Dads. I spend most of my time on LinkedIn. I do write every single day on LinkedIn. So if you want to kind of see the thoughts and ideas I'm throwing out there. And then from a business standpoint, you can find me at missionfit.co. And so if guys want a free training program specifically for Christian fathers who are busy, you can go there and find that. You can find more information about kind of what we're doing with that program and those 3 tiers that we talked about earlier: the inconsistency, the loneliness, and the confusion.
Cool. Chris, I appreciate you so much. Listeners, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in another episode of the podcast. See ya.